pledge allegiance to the flag
of
the
the
United
United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands,
stands
one nation,
one
under God,
under God,
indivisible.
indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, Sarah.
Captain.
Here.
President.
Present.
Ms. Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Knox.
Here.
Dr. Wayne.
Here.
Ms. Tucker,
here.
and Mr. Christensen.
Here.
Any correspondence or changes to the agenda? I would assume not. So persons to be heard, Sarah?
All right, is there anyone under person to be heard from the public? Yes. And then I have one to read as well.
Hi, my name is Dave Miller. I'm the fire chief for the city and borough of Sitka. And I'm up here just to say thanks to all the fire department volunteers, the career staff, the police department, and the hospital staff for staying super prepared for anything that might happen in Sitka. We've been lucky, and the numbers have said 0 every night, and it's a stressful thing every night. And especially if Sarah or John call me later in the evening, it's like, oh no, what now? But we've been lucky, and we're lucky because that we've had zeros, because of the people in this community have stepped up and done all the things that have been right so far to make it that way. I'm not here to promote the mandate or not the mandate. I'm not even here to talk about that. I'm just saying thanks to everybody for all you've done to keep Sitka safe, to make our jobs great. And I just want to remind everybody to wash your hands, cough in your sleeve, wear a mask, hunker down, and stay 6 feet apart, no matter what the mandates are. If we do that for a while, we will keep this community a great place and a safe place to live. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you for your leadership too, Dave.
You bet.
What else, Sarah?
Okay, I also have a written comment that I received from Marcia Howard. She writes, I wanted to publicly express my disappointment regarding the vote last meeting on extending the deadline for filing or paying city sales tax for the first quarter of 2020 until July 31st. This was an attempt introduced to help hard-hit small businesses in Sitka. Small businesses have many monthly obligations to meet: payroll, rent, utilities, insurance, and much more, and typically manage their budgets to accommodate these expenses, relying on past history and current trends to do that. We balance the income and expenses against each other. When one side of that equation is ripped away completely, we go under at an astronomical rate compared to folks who don't have these kinds of obligations. And there appears to be very little in the way of a safety net. So far, the SBA EIDL loan isn't available. Businesses with inventories have taken in an enormous amount of product in anticipation of the upcoming tourist season, which also will not happen this year, and maybe not next year either. This project is also due for payment in addition to fixed expenses. The summer season, which keeps us afloat, looks to be non-existent. A postponement of the sales tax, or at least a decision to waive any penalties and interest for a 3-month period, would extend the time for small businesses to get their feet back under them and get their finances, loan applications, closeouts, or whatever is needed underway. In response to the gentleman who noted that the money does not belong to the business owner, but rather to the city, I would like to say that typically these funds are not kept in a separate escrow account. We work with cash flow just like the government and other entities do. So it amounts to a small loan. So what? I appreciate the gesture of solidarity it represents in these trying times. I also appreciate that the Assembly has an enormous burden right now, making decisions and keeping the community safe and healthy, and that small businesses are but a wee part of that. Thank you for your service, especially with the extra stress this pandemic puts on you. I do, however, suggest revisiting at least the penalties associated with the late payment of city sales tax. And again, comments are from Marcia Howard.
Thanks. Is that it, Sarah?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we're now at for the meeting of the emergency meeting tonight. Item A, reference to ordinance 20-094, discussion and direction of what we're going to do about that. John, you want to give us an overview, and then we'll. And I think Sarah has some persons to be heard that will probably waive with the Assembly's approval. Let's hear from the public that she's got written statements before we have our discussion. Anyway, John, what we got here?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks to Assembly members for being here tonight for this emergency meeting. This emergency meeting was requested in response to the governor's health mandate number 16 that was released yesterday. And I think everybody's had a chance to read through it now. The purpose or the reason I asked for it was this mandate has pretty clear and scaled ways to reopen the economy and could potentially be in conflict with the ordinance we have in place and one of the resolutions we have in place. So there's obviously going to be some questions from the public, and I just wanted to have this discussion in the open to clear up as much confusion as we can. And I listed those two ordinance, or I'm sorry, the ordinance and the resolution in the agenda, so we could see specifically which ones we're talking about. So I'll leave it at that for right now, but I am available to answer any questions and how this mandate reads and how it compares to our ordinance and resolution. So.
Yeah, before I hear from the public, though, I would just like to say, for people who have not read this mandate, I had a call today about quarantine. The quarantines in the nursing center, the quarantine for people out of state travel, all those mandates stay in place. All the mandate does, and it's not all, it's an important thing, it lists 4 specific items, restaurants, retail, a couple others with very strict restrictions and how they go 25% occupancy in a restaurant and so forth. Anyway, it's a very controlled opening, and I just want the public to know that the mandates, and it also states that we all need to continue to do what we've been doing in terms of social distancing and masks and cleaning. So thank you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, the first person that will be, actually I should ask, is there anyone from the public who would like to testify first? Mayor, we do have Mary Magnuson is here to speak. She's coming up to the podium.
Hello, I'm Mary Magnuson with the Mean Clean and Mean Clean at Totem Square. This is untenable. 25% opening is not going to save our local restaurants. I would urge the Assembly to follow along with your mandate of May 12th, which we plan on doing anyway, because we think that's what we need to do to keep the community safe. And there is no restaurant that can operate at a 20% capacity. It just isn't possible. So what we need to do is keep ourselves safe, continue our delivery, our carry out, our curbside, and look at this again on May 12th, which was a very prudent date put forth by this assembly. And I appreciate that you can understand that we just can't do this. It's not going to work out, and we need to keep this community safe. So far, we have been very, very blessed, and I would love to see that continue. I appreciate all of your work. Everybody's working hard every day, and that's what we're doing too, to see what we can do to keep things safe. And we appreciate the fact that people came forward and urged the governor to open up beer and wine delivery. Helps a little bit, doesn't quite make up for the difference, but it does help that we have this inventory sitting around that as we were, all ramping up for the season, we made purchases and we've got this inventory sitting there. So we do appreciate that. But I would like to urge the community to continue to hunker down as you all suggested. And I realize the governor is trying to follow along with the president, but that's probably not the best thing for our community. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to give comment? Okay, I will call Dwayne Lambert. He has requested to be called this evening.
Welcome to the voicemail of 907773.
Okay, I will go on to the next person. Next person on the, for public testimony this evening by phone is Eric Jordan.
Hello, Eric Jordan here.
Hi, Eric. It's Sarah calling for the assembly meeting.
Wait, let me move you here. Okay, I understand you're ready for my testimony now, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. My name is Eric Jordan. I'm a longtime resident of Sitka. And I want to encourage the assembly to stay the course here. First of all, I think the assembly and our city leaders and the health officials have done a wonderful job in protecting us so far. But that's because you took decisive action. And I really want you to continue to do whatever you need to do to protect the lives here. We can rebuild our businesses, and my business is suffering, and I've been calling crew members and trying to figure out how to get them here, and it's been tough conversation. But we can resurrect our businesses. We cannot resurrect our lives that we may lose. And I'm a little bit prejudiced here because I'm at high risk. I'm 70 years old. I have diabetes too, although it's managed by my walking and dieting program. And I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor. And as many of you know, even though I've lost 98 pounds over the last few years, I'm obese. So I'm at high risk of dying. And so relaxing these restrictions too soon puts me at high risk. So I'm speaking personally, but I'm also speaking for a lot of other people in this community who really support the action taken by our leaders here so far. And thank you. Let's save the lives and then rebuild our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Yep.
Okay, the next person that I will be calling is Rachel Roy.
Hello, this is Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. It's Sarah calling from the assembly meeting. We're ready for your comments for public testimony.
Okay, thank you. This is Rachel Roy. I am the Executive Director of the Greater Sitka Chamber of Commerce and Visit Sitka. And I just wanted to, I was actually hoping to be able to make comment if there were action taken. But I can say that we had a gathering of 60 businesses yesterday, our chamber luncheon, which is, we held digitally through Zoom. And in those conversations, we talked to business owners and each shared ideas and solutions that they're putting in place to get us through this time to keep their business going. And many of them do not have their doors open currently, and everything from pickup and delivery to online stores that have opened. And there was a real kind of a thread of optimism there that we can get through this as a community and as business owners. Not easy decisions tonight, and I will be listening in as the conversation goes forward. But just know that businesses are paying attention to what is being released. They're looking at how they can keep their customers and their staff safe. They're putting plans in place. So the more that we can, be transparent about what the city's looking for. We were able to talk with the administrator this week about the 14-day self-quarantine and what that looks like. I think one thing that is important is that there isn't a one answer for every business, because each business has unique situations that we should really have somewhere in place there that we can allow those that can safely be open, operate, but really consider, of course, the health and care of our community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Okay, next testifying will be Linda Marlin.
Hello.
Hi, Linda. This is Sarah calling from the assembly meeting. We are ready for your public comment.
Sir, I haven't been able to even get you guys up on my computer.
Did you want to offer public comment on item A, discussion, direction, possible action in response to the revised new state mandates?
Yes, I would like to watch it and listen to it before I make a statement. Okay, now I can see you guys.
We haven't had any, we're taking public comment first, and then assembly discussion will happen.
Well, could you explain to me, is this for us being, to stay open for the city or what?
So tonight, the assembly will just be discussing the revised state health mandates and new state health mandates. There could also be some discussion around emergency ordinance 2020-14 that was approved last week, and then also the resolution extending the hunker down to May 12th.
So May 12th? We cannot wait to May 12th. These fish out here in this ocean, we can't wait that long. You know, we're gonna have fishermen stay here in town for 2 weeks before they can go out on a fishing boat. Do you realize this for our town to be paid? And if you guys want to spend all this money here, I suggest you guys go over to the airport, and everyone that comes will have to walk through it. Sorry about that. And I just feel that's the only way you can keep, if anyone has a fever, bingo, it would show up, and you're in town, you know? Otherwise, this is silly. I don't understand what's going on. You know, we've got young people that are suffering. We got people down there in trailer park that are living paycheck to paycheck. And I just don't understand. We're doing the best that we can. And I just feel this isn't New York. This isn't LA. This isn't Chicago. You know, this isn't even Anchorage. We live on an island, for goodness sake. And this isn't the first fires that we've went through. When I was working up at the Bayview, we had a ship that no one could get off of. I remember, I do believe it was that, one of the fires, anyway, they couldn't get off the ship. So we didn't close up our town for it. But, I wish everyone the best, but I can't get you guys, I want to hear what you guys have to say before I comment again, you understand?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for calling me, and you guys all can stay out there, okay?
Thank you, Linda. Okay, next I'll proceed with the written comments that I received. This first comment is from Ariane Goudeau. First off, thank you for all that you do for the city. This is my first time writing in, and so I hope this is the right way to do it. I'm contacting you regarding my thoughts on the COVID-19 situation. I see a lot of fear among the community regarding the city opening back up. Forgive me if this is something you are already doing. I would like to see more transparency and data out there. How many tests can SICA handle per day? How long will it take to get the results? How accurate are those results? Will there be contact tracing, and can local volunteers be recruited to do such tracing? How many hospitalizations is SEARCH able to accommodate? What response is the city planning to take when SICA has its first positive case? These are just some of the questions that are floating around in my head. I think them being answered will go a long way in easing fears among the community. Ultimately, there will always be fearful people, but I think the answer to most anxiety is information. And again, those thoughts are from Ariane Goudeau. The next individual providing written testimony is Marian Allen. In SICA, we have been fortunate in that we have no diagnosed COVID-19 cases so far. We are about to have hundreds of seasonal workers arriving from all over. It takes just one person who slips through to set up a chain reaction, and we have a healthcare system that gets overwhelmed. We probably face people dying because of that. All the science and modeling tell us that to have a chance of being successful, there must be very expensive testing, and a negative reading only means that the person does not have COVID when that test was taken. Testing must be repetitive, and contact tracing is absolutely essential. Opening steps need to be at least 1 week apart, but preferably 2. And throughout that process, we need to have aggressive testing and case contact tracing that is very thorough. That requires many case contact tracers and many tests. Are we able to do that aggressive testing repetitively? Do we have the people trained to be case contact tracers? I strongly urge SICA to maintain our mandate until such time as these conditions can be met, and after we see what the seasonal workers bring into town. I do not want to see SICAns very sick and dying, or experience that myself. Based on the science and the experience worldwide that we can learn from, it is just plain stupid to lift this mandate just as all the seasonal workers are coming to town. And again, those comments are from Marian Allen. Next, I will read comments from Robin Sherman. I am writing to express appreciation for the city's efforts to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in SICA. The fact that we have not had any confirmed local cases of the virus is a good indication that our strategies to date have been effective. I am also concerned about the economic impact of the pandemic on our community and its residents. I support efforts to allow more economic activities subject to best practices to protect residents from being infected by visitors to SICA and by community spread of COVID-19. I realize that SICA may have limited authority to enforce restrictions that are more stringent than state law. That being said, I support maintaining the requirement for 14-day quarantine for people coming to SICA from other locations, and for employers to submit plans for how they intend to bring outside workers into the community safely. I am skeptical of the governor's recently announced plans to permit reopening of restaurants, salons, and tattoo establishments. If this city has the authority to delay implementation of this policy until the assembly has received testimony from infectious disease experts rather than politicians that this can be done safely, this would be my preference. I support efforts to allow other retail business to open if they can do so in a way that minimizes the risk of transmission of disease. I would also support a local ordinance requiring residents of Sitka to wear face masks in retail establishments and in other indoor environments where employees and customers cannot avoid coming within a few feet of each other. I understand that everyone wants to get back to their normal lives. I'm as impatient to do so as others. But I am following the news from communities where COVID-19 is spreading widely and rapidly, killing elders, people with chronic health conditions, and healthcare professionals. I'm willing to live with restrictions and economic impacts to prevent that from happening in Sitka. Thank you for your work on behalf of the community during this difficult time. And again, those comments are from Robin Sherman. Next, I'll be reading comments from Bradley Schaefer. Most Alaskan communities are geographically quarantined. We have an opportunity to provide essential data to the world regarding community and individual reality as it relates to COVID-19. The opportunity is to place our efforts on structured testing of everyone in most, if not all, rural communities. The data collected and shared with the world will facilitate the eventual containment and resumption of some form of life as we knew it. Travelers are deemed guilty of carrying the virus until their innocence is proven 14 days later. Standardized testing for travel, say 5 days before departure and then 5 days upon arrival. This could alleviate the uncertainty with travel in general and aid the community acceptance of seasonal travelers. Our current circumstances as residents is a concoction of emotions, irrational judgment, and inconsistencies. Simply put, everyone is dealing with it their own way. A community-wide testing protocol will enable us to trust each other again. Where does the money come from? I believe it should come through the state, or the deep pocket being the federal government. The Indian Health Service is the natural candidate to assume this responsibility. I know bureaucracies don't like change, but this is worth it. We need the support of our federal officials in order for funding and materials to implement community-wide testing and data gathering. We have no idea what the impact may be to Indigenous residents. Who knows, maybe we find an immunity exists within this segment of our population. What an interesting twist of history to find after what the Europeans brought to this continent almost 500 years ago. Native Alaskans are deemed to have the immunity key. Why is there a general nationwide hesitance to implement testing in communities such as ours? I do not know. Why wait for someone to become ill to find them guilty of carrying the virus when we can assure each other we are innocent of carrying the virus? The more we learn about this virus, the less we know. Sitka has the leadership and displays the rationale for progressive information gathering. The most critical information is in our saliva and blood. Thank you for the opportunity to express my thoughts and opinion. And again, those comments are from Bradley Schaefer. Next, I will read comments from Tony Block, owner of Bayview Pub. I'm writing to plead that we as a community allow our businesses to open under the Governor's Health Mandate 16 that was presented yesterday, April 22nd, 2020. We understand that today, Sitka has 0 confirmed cases. If this still holds true, one would think the Assembly would pass a vote to allow businesses to open under the new mandate and commence operations. In reading the mandate, the Governor applies a resumption of local mandates, stating to the point, business operations and any other activity permitted to operate under this mandate may not be prohibited by local, municipal, or tribal mandate, directive, resolution, ordinance, regulation, or other order. It is vital to get our local economy up and running again, even if limited in how we can operate. It will be an improvement compared to what we have struggled with for the past month. In closing, the pub can easily comply with the 10-foot rule due to current size of the restaurant. We have already marked out tables with proper spacing. We have multiple doors to create a one-way flow of traffic, and our new maximum capacity during this mandate would be 37 bodies total throughout dining and pool room. Hand sanitizers and masks have been purchased. We will post needed signage, and our employees have been trained prior to closing, but we will review and retrain where needed. If you have any questions or if someone wants to visit the pub to review things, I am here 12 hours a day for a phone call or personal meeting. And again, those comments were from Tony Bach, owner of the Bayview Pub. Next, I will read comments submitted by Corey Bagan. Honorable Mayor and City Assembly, thank you very much for your service. I know many of you are on the front lines helping keeping our community safe. I truly appreciate your sacrifice. I also know that many of you own businesses that are suffering now, and for that, I am very sorry. I am writing to ask that you please rescind Emergency Ordinance 2020-14. It is not necessary, and I feel it opens up the city and borough of Sitka to future liabilities. I am strongly against challenging the state of Alaska through the legal system. It would be very expensive, and frankly, I do not think the city would prevail. I ask that you please allow us to follow the state of Alaska's health mandates. This ordinance appears to be a direct attack on only a few businesses in Sitka. We are all following the governor's mandates and will continue to do so. I understand you are all just trying to protect us, and I appreciate that, but it's time to rescind this ordinance. And again, those comments are from Corey Bagan. Next, I will read comments from Teresa Weiser of Alaska Premier Charters and Wild Strawberry Lodge. Thank you for the opportunity to comment this evening. These are strange times. We find ourselves swimming in a sea of uncertainty. I have been a lodge owner for 30+ years in Sitka. Many things all of us took for granted to conduct businesses in past years are now in question. During 2019, Wild Strawberry Lodge alone paid over $200,000 in taxes to the city, just from the city sales tax, the bed tax, and the fish box tax combined for that 1 year alone. The loss of revenues for each business in Sitka represents similar percentages of loss of tax revenues to the city. Due to many cancellations for the 2020 season, we are already down 30% in lost revenues. I am projecting we will have a 50% reduction in gross revenues for 2020. We do not plan to start 2020 operations before June 15th. And more likely, we probably won't be starting until June 25th or July 1st is my best guess. I repeat, guess. Guessing at a feasible start date is like throwing a dart blindfolded at the dartboard. What are the odds of hitting the target? How do we safely open and operate our businesses in this current climate while the virus is still a public threat? Is this even possible? What are the calculated risks? If and when we can start our two big questions, and we could then be hit with a rule to operate our vessels at 25% or 30% maximum capacity. Reduced capacity on our vessels has been suggested as coming down the pipeline from the potential Alaska Health Mandate 15.1 coming out very soon, we are told by state officials. If we can even open up our businesses under new parameters, mandates, and just call it restrictions, it may not be financially feasible to operate, and which rules could change weekly. How do we meet each new and revised city ordinance and governmental health mandates and phases of mandates? What is the next regulation hammer to fall on our heads, creating more financial uncertainty? We know we are not starting for at least another month and a half or longer. And we know our business operating plan needs to show we are implementing certain precautions, corrective measures, or other preventive measures steps rather than the failure to prevent or remove a particular hazard. How do we write a comprehensive business operations plan to address all items, risks in ordinance 2020-14 adequately for approval and submit by 3 p.m. tomorrow? How is this even possible for many local business owners who employ out-of-state seasonal workers and who have not yet been contacted by city officials? Through discussions with state officials, it has been brought to our attention that the state of Alaska was unable to provide the city of Sitka with submitted operating plans, not because the plans contain proprietary information, but because the review team received over 2,000 plans in less than a week, and they were swamped. They were only able to review a little over 100 of the plans submitted in the first week. The state of Alaska is not going to prevent businesses from operating without an approved plan, so long as the business has submitted their plan prior to the arrival of their first out-of-state employees. What is not being addressed are all the travelers coming to Alaska that are not here for employment or business, including the travelers coming for tourism, activities, fun, pleasure, and leisure. Question, the very last line of the City of Ithaca Emergency Ordinance 2020-14 posted online, which was signed on April 14, 2020, below their signatures reads, reenactment pre-scheduled for June 9th, 2020, to address and extend the 61-day expiration. I do not recall any discussion on April 14th about June 9th, 2020 agenda to address or extend this another 61 days. This creating again, those comments are from Teresa Rush. And those are the only written comments that I have for you this evening.
Hey, Sarah, can you email those to us? I had a really hard time hearing you on a lot of that.
Yep, we sure will.
So is that all of it, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay, we're back to the assembly then for discussion about what we do now. Comments? Valerie, yes. Valerie,
I've done, I don't know if you can hear me or not. I've done a lot of research on civil liberties and civil rights, and Attorney General William Barr as recently as, I think, day before yesterday, said public health emergencies do not give governments unlimited powers. We need to make sure that we are not intruding on civil liberties. I've said many, many times that I think that we are intruding on civil liberties. And I also believe that our emergency ordinance and our emergency resolutions are contrary to what the state is telling us. And in the governor's latest mandate, it says, you know, if we follow stricter ones, they're invalid. So perhaps we need a legal opinion, but I'd like to read a little bit more of this interview that Attorney General Barr was talking about. When you're faced with a potential catastrophe, he said, the government can deploy measures and even put temporary and reasonable restrictions on rights if really necessary to meet the danger. But it still has the obligation to adapt to the circumstances. Whatever powers the government has, whether it be the president or state governor, still is bounded by constitutional rights of the individual. Our federal constitutional rights don't go away in an emergency. They constrain what the government do. And in a circumstance like this, they put on the government the burden to make sure that whatever burdens it's putting on our constitutional liberties are strictly necessary to deal with the problem. I think that we need to rescind, from what I'm reading in Mandate 16, what was passed last week. And yes, I feel bad for the people that are scared and want to keep us in our own little bubble. And yeah, sure, some businesses can rebuild, but I've been on the phone today with 3 or 4 different business people that don't know if they will be able to, given the mandates. And I respect Mary Magnuson's opinion of, you know, they aren't going to open till May 12th. That's their choice. But when we're passing all these crazy overreaching rules, we're not doing our duty. Thank you.
yeah, Tor.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot. First of all, I don't think we're overreaching, but that, and I read the states saying that they don't think we have the ability to do this. I will tell you that I will never vote. I'm not going to vote to rescind them, mainly because when people die, and they will, maybe not in Sitka, but these, I don't want to have to take responsibility because, and that's going to lie squarely on the governor's shoulders. I don't think the current mandates are all that unreasonable. I think it's too soon. I think it's about a week or two too soon. But my thoughts on, as I thought about this today was, I don't want to rescind this. And, but at the same time, the state has more guns than we do. And if they want to come in and do it, fine. And enforce it, but that, again, I want the responsibility for what happens if they're not going to let us protect our town as we see fit, to be on their shoulders. Again, the current health mandate, I have some problems with it around the issues. I think mainly I think it's a little bit too soon, and we don't begin to have the ability to test and things to say that we really don't have it in Sitka. I'm much more concerned about what's coming down the pike and the travel mandate and the travel restrictions. And that I think we need to, I mean, if we need to possibly make a few amendments, I know John, to it, that I could see that to make it a little more workable. But you know, we've seen some positive from that already. The state actually looking at the plans and responding to them. But I would recommend that we keep them in place and then let the state do what they do. And I understand, you know, that we can't stop businesses from opening up. In fact, as a resolution, we couldn't either in the first place. As a resolution, it has no actual power. It's just a recommendation, but I think we should try and keep it as tight as we can, at least for another week or two, because if you look at the science of it, the first month of restricting movement really is the place where you're just setting it up. It's the second month where you see it actually come down. And we're just getting into that second month. And so every day that we can hold it off, the curve will come down more and more. So again, my recommendation is we keep it in place and let the state do what they're going to do. And again, I know that we can't necessarily enforce, and I don't really want to get in a big battle with the state, but if they're going to do that, let them do it. And I'm not going to be an accomplice.
Other comments on this, Emily?
And I'll agree with a lot of what Tor said. I also don't think we are going to be the only community that's going to stand up to this governor trying to do what he's doing. I think his preemption of what some communities are saying that they would rather over what he's trying to do is way overreaching. I mean, if you read that piece in there, he even wants to supersede what sovereign tribal governments have put out there. And, you know, that's a total losing battle there for him. But we're not going to be the only community in this state that's going to stand up on this one. I think there's a lot of problems with this plan. I think in a lot of ways it's backwards in its implementation. There's some issues in there that I think put us in some really dangerous hotspots. In particular, with the piece with childcare, bringing forward the ability to bring kids into childcare, which is necessary, and a lot of people are hurting because they don't have childcare. But if we're going to have people going back to work and then not have adequate childcare, we're already stressed there as it is. This just isn't. It's not gonna be good for people who work the front lines, who are the base level workers in our communities. And then when these kids go back into their childcare settings, yeah, the 10 kids that are in a quote unquote group aren't supposed to mix, but staff aren't required to stay with those 10 kids, and that staff are going back and forth between groups. You know, that kind of blows it out of the water right there. And you're mixing too much, and then those kids are going back out into their families. You know, some of those families are already stressed because they're trying to take care of elderly parents or whatever. We're just putting ourselves in a lot of risk and not having the proper precautions built up. You know, I have to agree. There was comments made earlier about the contact tracing. We don't have the capacity built up to do really great contact tracing if we do start to see a spike in numbers. our testing capacity unless I hear different from Dr. Brule, and I haven't heard this since the last time we talked with him. We don't have the testing capacity to really get out there and do the kind of testing that we need to make sure that we are staying safe. And I mean, maybe some of the members of the operation control or the you know, maybe there's different information out there. I haven't seen it yet, and I'm not comfortable going down the road that the governor is looking to go, and certainly not as fast as he's looking to go. It doesn't make sense to me at this point.
Well, when we were talking to the governor, Dr. Zink was there, and I mentioned to Dr. Zink that Elliot Brule has done, first of all, contracts tracing emanates from the state. They have the capacity to do that. And when I talked to Dr. Brule, he said he's done contract tracing at Juneau, Craig, and Petersburg, and it's all been successful, and Dr. Zink gave him high marks. So I'm not a doctor, I'm just passing information, but I think if a case occurs, whether we do it or don't do it, the first thing you gotta do is you gotta isolate people. We have the capacity here in Sitka to do it, and then you've got to do contract tracing. So I think that is, and before we go there, in this quarantine stuff, all the major mandates affecting out-of-state travel remain in place. Okay, Dr. Wade, you got comments you want to talk about or not?
I have some comments after Dr. Ween if he doesn't have anything to say.
Thank
okay.
you for asking me. I saw that Dr. Brule put his picture back on, and so maybe he might want to comment earlier. And so I would yield the floor to the gentleman from across the bridge.
Yes, let me, Kevin Moser, let me go to Dr. Brule since I used his name.
Totally.
If I misquote him, he can correct me. Dr. Brule, good to see you again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Paxton and members of the Assembly. This is, of course, really difficult circumstances for all of us. I'd be happy to give you some updates about where things are with regards to testing and with regards to your healthcare system here in Sitka and our regional situation with testing and care. I would preface those updates with a few answers to questions that were raised by members of the public, as well as an acknowledgement of the fact that things do continue to evolve pretty rapidly with regards to the availability of testing and the circumstances in the state epidemiologically. So Dr. Zink and I have remained in contact, and one of the things that has occurred with regards to the projections of the epidemiology of the pandemic in Alaska is that the numbers of cases have continued to slowly decline. If you go, I would encourage you and members of the public to go to the Alaska State Department of Health and Human Services website. They have a COVID-19 website, which has graphs which illustrate the incidence of new cases and through time. We have seen that decline. And our capacity to care for patients here in Sitka, as well as throughout the state, continues to be adequate for the more than adequate for the number of cases that are occurring currently within the state. The large concern, which has been recognized by you and by members of the public, is the possibility of the influx of people from outside the state. And I would just remind everybody that because this is a novel virus, we're all susceptible to it. And so the point at which there's large numbers of people entering the entering our community, and I speak of the community broadly, the Southeast Alaskan community, there is a significant potential for this to change. Currently at Mount Edgecombe Hospital, we have 12 ventilators. We have the capacity for conventionally for 25 beds. We have a census, an average daily census that ranges between 12 and 15 patients most days. We have the ability to very rapidly ramp up to 40 beds. We have the capacity to also provide shelter and care for an additional 28 patients for both the purposes of quarantine and care for mild cases of COVID-19. And we also have the capacity to provide care at the Mount Edgecombe High School. We're in the process of completing our administrative relationship with Mount Edgecombe High School, and we have worked. I guess I should say that the staff of the Mount Edgecombe High School, as well as the administrative leadership in the state, has been wonderful in terms of their willingness to support operations here in Sitka. So our commitment to that is that as we go forward, and in the event that we do encounter large numbers of cases, which is possible, we do have the ability to expand in that direction as well. So our staffing is strong. We have shut down traveling and vacation for our staff, and we have a stance right now of really very strong preparedness. Our staff has been consistently and repeatedly trained in the use of protective equipment. We have a really strong supply of personal protective equipment. And because of that, we've been extending the supply of our protective equipment into various supportive environments, including our partners in transportation and medical transportation, as well as other adjunctive care providers, home health, etc. We have expanded testing. Our ability to test continues to increase. We continue to work. I can't even tell you how hard we're working on finding new sources of testing supplies and testing ability. So not only have we in the last 2 weeks identified additional rapid testing supplies, but increasing supplies of, for lack of a better term, I'd call traditional testing. The time to turn around those traditional tests has decreased to about 24 hours. So even our routine tests are about 24 hours. We've heard some discussion about what is the accuracy of these tests. It is variable depending on where it is, but I would assure people that it's a direct test of the presence of the virus, and the sensitivity of that is about 95%, particularly for the non-rapid test. For the rapid test, it's probably a little bit lower, but the sensitivity of those tests is strong. We've tested over 200 people in Sitka. That's about 2.5% of the total population of Sitka have been tested. And the fact that those tests have come up negative really speak to the fact that in the present circumstance, there's not a there's not a strong presence of the virus in the community. If it's present, if it was present in large numbers, we should have seen it. Having said that, we're going to continue to expand our testing as we have more testing available. So what does that mean? Well, for starters, it means we're going to be testing all of our employees, or making it available to our employees and their household contacts, out of a desire to be able to reassure our patients. We also are looking forward to partnering with the city and all other economic drivers within the city to make testing available. It's premature for me to say that when that level of testing will be available, but certainly the availability, we have enough testing right now to be able to support the city in terms of creating some nice structured testing protocols for contractors that work for the city. A nice example of that would be the folks that are working on the harbor, or the folks that are working on our wastewater treatment, sewage plant, those kinds of things to support the city in that. And I should say, we're committed to supporting other communities that are where we supply care and where we have partnerships. So we're committed to all of our communities, and so other municipalities like Haines, or down on Prince of Wales Island, or Cake, or Klawock, or Hoona, we look forward to working with them as well to support their municipalities with testing and isolation or quarantine protocols to allow their projects to go forward. I've received contacts from other economic entities in Sitka and other communities who are interested in incorporating testing to allow safe movement forward. And we will work with them. We will be glad to work with anybody in any of our communities to try to keep our communities safe and protect all of our patients and community members. There's a limitation on the number of tests that we have. I'm pleased that we currently have increasing inventory of those tests. And as that inventory increases, we'll increase our commitments to not only the municipalities, but to private economic drivers in all areas. So in summary, I'd say, we're poised to do our very best to support you and our other communities with testing insofar as we can get our hands on those materials. We've got several thousand additional tests that are on their way, but I can't commit to the use of those tests until they're in hand. And there's also the necessity of us holding back several thousand to be able to deal with a surge in patients locally, which is possible. The last thing I'll say is that in spite of all of our hardship and difficulty, that the thing that has kept us well has been our isolation. And it's important for all of us to have, to have a realistic understanding of the fact that if we start to bring hundreds or thousands of people into the region, we will experience a rise in the number of cases, and it will challenge us. So if we implement the opening that the governor has recommended, and we continue to be living in the world of Southeast Alaska without lots of people pouring into it, I think we'll be probably fine. But as soon as there's a large influx of people from outside, those calculations will probably change. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bro. Yeah, Kevin Mosier. Valerie, Kevin Mosier wanted to speak.
I just have a
Well,
question, Dr. Brule.
Okay.
I want to know if there have been, or do we have the ability to test for antibodies in Sitka? So say like somebody may have had it, my specific question goes to somebody that got medevaced out in November with pretty much the symptoms, and the person has been denied. They've requested the tests now, and they've been denied because they said it didn't exist in November, but we don't really know that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I don't believe China. Sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. That's a great question. There's two parts to it. The first is, was this present much earlier than we were aware of? The answer is, regardless of any conspiracy theory, the answer is that testing that of patients who were very sick early in the year, in January and February, has shown that there was the presence of the virus probably in the United States quite early. There was a report in the New England Journal of Medicine this week about a particular patient in February and late January. So the virus, this particular virus has a wide range of, ways in which it makes you sick, or, the spectrum of illness. And so it turns out it probably was here before we were aware of it. With regards to antibody testing is going to be a really wonderful way for us to move forward when it becomes reliably available. Currently, there's no antibody test that is available, that's FDA approved, and that doesn't have a lot of problems. So there was a whole bunch of, and by say a whole bunch, hundreds of antibody tests that were released by Chinese corporations into the general market. The FDA did not validate or get involved in vetting those tests. And those tests have a very poor reliability. Why? The short answer is the coronavirus is one of a large family of coronaviruses. So all of us have had coronaviruses in the past that have caused common colds, and these tests don't distinguish between this coronavirus and those coronaviruses. So it gives us a lot of false positives and false negatives. So I sent a letter to the leaders of all of the Southeast communities about a month ago saying these tests are out on the market. They're spurious. They will lead to inaccurate results. We are working with some leaders up in Anchorage to bring a validated, more highly reliable version of antibody tests to our practice that we would be able to hopefully offer to members of the community. And that'll be a game changer, because what that'll do is it'll tell us who's had the virus and is recovered and who hasn't, and who's susceptible. And that's still a promise and not a reality.
Okay. Yeah, Kevin Mosier.
I'm sorry, I have a question for Dr. Brule.
Yes, right, Dr. Wayne.
You mentioned the sensitivity is 95% for the tests. What goes hand in glove with sensitivity is specificity. Could you tell me what the specificity is, please?
Yeah, I would love to. I don't have it, Rich. The reason is that it's not scientifically determined. So the estimates are between 85 and 95%. And of course, so to follow up with something that you as a scientist and a physician are aware of, and most people are not, is that specificity determines the negative predictive value of a test. So that means that if you have a negative result, how meaningful is that result? How reliable is that result? So it's the negative predictive value. And so when you there's an added scientific and mathematical difficulty, which is that in environments like ours where there is not a I don't want to get too technical here, but the word is prevalence, where the disease is not common. It's not common, and we know it's not common. So I mean, there's not a lot of people who have this in Southeast. Well, it turns out that the validity of a test in terms of its predictive value depends on how prevalent it is in the population, which means that as it becomes less common, the predictive value of the test gets poorer. It's less predictive. So we're fighting upstream against those realities, and there's absolutely nothing that I can do about that. But what I do know is that a positive is a positive. We've tested quite a large portion of the population. I know 2.5% doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. And false positives, false negatives aside, we know that the incidence of this disease in our community currently is quite low. So, going back to the governor's mandate, some of these things, like one portion of the mandate refers to non-public facing businesses. And I feel pretty strongly that non-public facing businesses should be able to proceed in accordance with the governor's mandate, because if they wear masks and maintain physical distancing, things should be fine in those environments. So, yeah.
Okay, no, Kevin? Yeah, thank you, Dr. Brewer. Kevin Mosier.
It's okay if Dr. Wien wanted to go first. I think he seemed to have some questions.
No, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, okay. I'll try to keep it simple. Dr. Brule did answer a lot of questions. That was very helpful. I have thought about it a lot too, and I think we all have. I just put out my opinion here. I think that we should allow the current things that we did recently, like the hunker down, to expire naturally. And that expires mid next month, just a few weeks away. And I'd also like to, and then I'd like to reemphasize what the mayor said, which was that the biggest concern that people have, I think, at the heart of the matter right now is the fear of a big influx of people from out of state or out of the country, and that's a very valid concern. But the state mandate, which our emergency ordinance is linked to, is still in effect. So I don't think there's anything to worry about as far as any type of protection going away, because as far as my understanding, it's not going to go away right now. We're still protected according to the law. But in general, after that expires, I think we should be aligning with the state. There's liability issues with trying to go against what the state's doing. And even as Dr. Brule said, for the most part, the state, what they're proposing right now is not all that aggressive, really. It's a slow pace right now. So those are my thoughts. I think we're okay right now. I would like to kind of also reemphasize that I'm not saying right now necessarily, but at some point we as a culture are going to have to start. We're going to have to accept some level of risk. There's going to be no way to completely isolate and insulate ourselves forever. This was never about that. This was about flattening the curve and increasing the ability to handle these things. But if we just stay hunkered down forever, that's not a tenable situation either. So I'll just one more question. I did want to have somebody in the public ask me if I'd ask this, and I think this is a fair question. According to the new mandates, and I have read them, but this is more towards John Leach. There's concern from people about what the city is going to do as far as public access to the Centennial Public Library, City Hall, and I think people just would like to be reassured that there's going to be measures taken to protect everyone. So that you can answer that, John, after I'm done. And I'd also like to mention too that put this in perspective, we have limited ability to actually enforce some of these things. So I believe we have the protections in place legally currently. We don't need to go do anything else. I think the state isn't asking too much. I think it's a very prudent plan. And I think most people, by and large, are going to follow these measures and be very cautious and very careful. And I think the businesses and organizations are going to continue to do that well as well. And those who aren't, the law or any change in the law isn't going to change that anyways. So I guess those are my my thoughts. And John Leach, if you could just answer that question as well about those the buildings, the Centennial Public Library and the City Hall, that would be great. Thank you.
I can answer that question. Thank you. We talked about that at the EOC this morning, actually. We will live under the current ordinance and the current resolution that we have in place. So if we decide to leave everything in place as it is now, City Hall will remain closed as it is, basically following our own ordinances and following our own resolutions. So at the EOC this morning, I asked everybody to put a plan together to open and to put a plan together to stay closed. So we're taking measures right now. We've started installing plexiglass barriers in the utility payment offices. We've got Public Works, the same things installed. The library, we spoke this afternoon about ways they could continue services if we scale things and opening. So plans are coming together, and we're ready to execute either way.
Other comments from the assembly? Dr. Wayne.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak here today. I just have to say that this is a question of damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I think that the mandate 16 is in some ways a bit of a red herring as a focus point for us. The truth of the matter is the cat is out of the bag. As soon as you open up fisheries, et cetera, you change the dynamic of spread. There is a real difference between, in an epidemiologic, intra-community spread and extra-community spread. And once we take out that piece, meaning we are like running around like little Brownian molecules here and we have 0 cases. But the truth is, once we change that dynamic, which is nothing that we can do about it, that I heard all the testimony that came and we need to protect ourselves, but I've heard nothing about closing the fisheries. I've heard none of our legislators talk about closing the fisheries and preventing people from coming in here. So the bottom line is that we've changed the dynamic. So in a very real way, there is nothing we can do. And in some ways, except get back with our lives. And an important aspect is that we have to deal with. New York released some interesting epidemiologic data recently, and they've been a hot spot and lots of deaths. 90% of the deaths were people over 65 with one or more comorbidities. And so they didn't go any further than that because the most common one was hypertension. The second one was diabetes. But you don't know if these people who succumbed were controlled, what medications they were on, what influences. But the important thing is that let's look at Alaska numbers. Today, there were 337 cases of positive. We've had 9 deaths, that's 2.6%. And we've had, I think it was 36 hospitalizations, that's 10%. Do you really believe there are only 337 positive cases in Alaska? In Boston, they did a study of the Pine Street Clinic, the Pine Street Inn, which is the homeless shelter, and they have 400 residents. And they did antibodies on everybody. And I don't think it was the Chinese stuff. And so what they found was there was 146 patients who already had convalescent serum. And so what begins to happen is that the bottom line is that there's a lot of asymptomatics. There are a lot of mild cases. We don't know what the denominator is of any of this disease. If we look at what happened in Singapore, which was one of the poster children of how to manage this because they had low cases, well, they started to bring in lots of immigrants. And the immigrants are workers, and they were living in dormitories, and they became just infested with COVID, and now represents 1/2 of their cases. And I'm sure people have seen the headlines with Smithfield pork processing, where they have had people in cramped working conditions who have spread this. Now, I bring these things up to say that there are all these variables, but the bottom line is that Sitka is not going to be an Amazonian tribe, and that the world is going to invade, and that is going to happen. And we have to really understand this. And we have to understand that there are at least 30 mutations to this virus currently counted, which means that the ability to get a vaccine is extremely limited. And people are putting, I'm sorry, Mayor, but people are putting their hope is that we'll have a vaccine to be protected. And that doesn't look so hot. This morning, ranitidine, I forget, I'm sorry, I don't have my list here, but that antiviral medication, it was leaked that their primary studies, and this was a hope, aren't really working. And so you really have to think about where we're going with this. On the one hand, we want to close everything down. And on the other hand, we're opening everything up. And it's a real contradiction. And I want to tell you that not last Saturday, but the Saturday before, it was a beautiful day here in Sitka, and people were all over the place, mandate or not. And by the way, the mandate, hunker down, is just a suggestion. And I want to know, I have to hear what the difference between 60 people at Seamart or 40 people at Lakeside or 15 people at Market Center, what the difference between that is and 4 people looking at coats at Work and Rugged. A lot of this just doesn't make sense to me. There are a lot of contradictions here. And like I said at the beginning of this, the cat is out of the bag, and we can talk all we want. And the mandate is not going to change anything because we've changed the dynamic and bringing in something that we are not going to control. And so we can pass what we want. We can pull back what we want. It's not going to change anything. So I will, there's a lot to say, but I will leave it at that. So, and we don't have authority anyway.
Right, Dr. Ween, bear with me. In my infantry mind tonight, we're talking about, do we want to allow a limited amount of businesses under very restrictive measures to open versus the event of fish processors bringing in out-of-state people in the next 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it is. First of all, at least the only plan I've read is Silver Bay Seafood. And assuming that the health unit they're working with, before they get here, they quarantine 14 days here, 14 days after. And, well, maybe you just missed their plan. Rich Riggs, I know him well. I don't think he bullshits. And I think he has a very detailed plan on how to deal with those. But that's a different issue than what we're dealing with tonight. My view tonight is, I think it's a rational approach. I think that we have to, and if a local business doesn't want to open like Mary, that's fine. But if a business wants to open, and I've talked to a couple of business people, and they're anxious to open. And even under these restricted conditions, so they at least can feel like get back to work and so forth. So my view is, I think that what the governor and with Dr. Zink, and I think that they're using science as best they can. I'm sure same way we depend on Dr. Brule and Dr. Zink is giving our governor good advice. So I think it's a rational proposal, but that's just 1 of 7. Yeah, Mr. Leach. Sure.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple more things I want to point out, just because they came up with some of the public comments and some of the assembly comments. This health mandate aligns with kind of how emergencies are supposed to run. It took us some time to get here, but emergency structures are federally supported, state managed, and locally executed. And this kind of puts us on a where we're all speaking the same language now. I've read through all the attachments, and I will say that every single one of them requires face coverings if you read through this thing. In fact, one of them requires surgical masks on top and instead of the fabric face coverings. There's some, as we've already talked about, some questions on the enforceability of our ordinance, and I'd really like Brian to speak here in a moment if that's okay. But this was also brought up that the quarantine that exists under state mandates 10 and state mandate 12, state mandate 10 for interstate travel has been extended till May 19th under the state. So the quarantine requirement with the exemptions on attachment A is still there. Mandate 12 is the intrastate travel, and that is also in effect. We are now receiving action plans from seasonal workers and fish processors and anybody that's traveling into here and doing business here. Those plans are now flowing directly to the Emergency Operations Center, like we had hoped. We are getting those. Also, as part of our request for the action plans, there's some confusion. But I can say my small list that I've written some notes on here is we have appraisers, electricians, plumbers, power line workers, construction workers, DOT personnel, inspectors, film crews, federal contractors coming in here to do federal work that are all trying to live under that ordinance. And when I tell them what the ordinance involves, they all say, well, I've gotten my approval from DHS or I've gotten my approval from the state already. I thought I was allowed to do this. So there's also a misconception that if they just give us the plan that was already approved by some other organization, that they are then exempt from our 14-day quarantine, which by language that does not exist. So there's undoubtedly some confusion here. But last little bit I want to point out is Dr. Zink on that phone call asked us to follow the data. So it was very important if we do this opening to look for spikes, look for cases, look for clusters, track it, and then Mayor, you were on the call. The mayor of Juneau spoke, and Dr. Zink asked questions. And at the time, there had been 26 total cases in Juneau. Of those 26 cases, 17 had recovered. They had 9 ICU beds available, and they had only used 1 for hospitalizations of those 26 cases. So all Dr. Zink was saying is those are the type of numbers they need to gauge whether or not we are flattening the curve or if things are increasing. So there are measures in this mandate that show us how to do this very conservatively. But if I can, I'd like to let Brian speak to the legality of ours versus the state and any potential issues.
Yep. Go, Brian.
The issue is, do the state health mandates preempt the city emergency ordinances? Well, clearly the state thinks they do. In each one of their health mandates, the state has put in bold letters at the bottom of their health mandates that they preempt not only our city ordinances, but they also preempt any kind of order directive by any other kind of entity other than the governor's health mandates. So they think so. But what's the risk if we pass an ordinance that satisfies it? Well, the risk is that the state will take some action against us to enforce those state health mandates, or some business or individual takes legal action against the state, against the city for our emergency ordinances to enjoin them from happening. And what's the risk of that happening? It's almost impossible to quantify that, determine what this risk is. And I'll tell you, I have had contact with the state. I know John has had contact with the state, and the state people have been approachable. They've been cordial, they've been cooperative, but they haven't been responsive. They don't come back and say, this is the authority for our preemption. They don't tell us why they can preempt us. They don't explain to whether or not they're going to enforce what we're going to do against them. In fact, they're always conciliatory, and I appreciate that. You should appreciate the state officials with their cordial, cooperative involvement. I think John would support what I'm saying here completely with what I've heard about this. But it still leaves us in a quandary. And the quandary is, do they preempt or not? Well, I think the issue more for you as an assembly member is what the risk do you want to take? Because there is a colorable argument that they don't preempt us. There's nothing in our Constitution or in the statutes, the state statutes in our code that says that the state preempts all of us for anything that we do, but it's undecided. And in my profession, I go to these weekly meetings I have on my trail of attorneys I talk to. This is essentially a case of first impression. There isn't a big body of case law that's going to tell us specifically to these circumstances whether state preempts city. So we're in a kind of a quandary. We're in an uncomfortable position that, if we're going to go forward with our emergency ordinances, will they somehow be preempted and be enforced by the state? I wish I could help you more with that. I can't. What I do know is a couple things. Is that Sarah tells me that the most recent mandate 16, which had probably the most aggressive language about preemption of all the mandates. If you read that one on page 2, you'll see a 3-paragraph outline of why they preempt local mandates. And I think this was a reaction to Sitka and other municipalities poking around, saying, hey, do you preempt us? Give us some authority. Give us some reasons why you think this has happened. And so this was a reaction to that. They put this in this mandate 16, but curiously enough, Sarah tells me this section of the mandate was pulled earlier this afternoon. It is not on the mandate. I think that shows us that there is continued reason why the state wants to be conciliatory and cooperative with the municipalities. So where does this leave you? Well, doesn't leave you with a strong legal opinion from this attorney that our emergency ordinances have more authority than the state. All I'm going to say is that we have a colorable argument. If you wanted to proceed with that, you'll have to weigh the risk of whether or not the state is going to go on and enforce against us in the future.
This is not about getting cover from the state. This is about each one of us, doing what we think is best for our town. My view is the state mandate is a rational way to proceed. We all have each of us have your own opinion and so forth. So either we want a motion to rescind or we want to just go ahead. Valerie.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Hanson. I'm sure all of us got the email stating that we could be held personally liable if people die. I don't really like being threatened, and I don't agree with what Assemblyman Christian said about not overreaching, and he won't vote to rescind because we'll be liable. You know what? If people go bankrupt, we'll be liable too. So no matter what happens, the governor is the one that made mandate 16. The governor will always have that on his shoulders. Our ordinance, the emergency ordinance that we passed last week, it has all sorts of things in it, like, the plan that's supposed to be into our administrator by tomorrow, which I think is unreasonable. And there's other verbiage in it that I don't think is good language, because it was a 5-page emergency ordinance that passed with very little public input, because we have restricted our public's right to attend these meetings. I've had so many calls from people saying, you know, I tried calling in, I tried to testify, I couldn't get in there. We need to get back to, you know, meeting how we were. And I'm wondering, I want the attorney's advice. If I come to the next assembly meeting on Tuesday to the Centennial Building, will I be arrested? And also, if there's a death, can we be personally liable? Thank you.
Brian, you want to answer those questions?
Will you be arrested? I don't think so. It's seriously within my authority to do that. Remember, I think there's been only directives to enforce anything that we have with arrests of any of our citizens. But that question probably needs to be asked of administration too. As far as liability, let me make this perfectly clear to the assembly. That is a big part of my job, is to try to protect you assembly members. You know, the people who are in good faith trying to protect this community. My job is to make sure that you do that in a way that you're not going to put yourself or the city in a liable situation. And I'm here to tell you that all of the actions and the things that you consider do not put you in personal jeopardy of what you're doing. And if they did, because the type of things that you're dealing with, we have a state statute and a code provision that this city will defend and indemnify you against any kind of action taken by anybody who tried to impose personal liability on you.
Well, by the way, I agree with Valerie. If it's at all possible, and we'll do whatever protocol needs to be done, I'd like to get the meetings back into Centennial Hall, because this is not the way to conduct city business. I mean, we need to be more open to the public, and if we're at Centennial Hall and we're on TV, we're going to have much more access to the public. Yeah, Tor.
I agree with that.
On that front, I mean, no matter what, even the governors are saying we should still be trying to do social distancing. And we should be modeling that, frankly. I mean, I wear a mask every time I go in the store. I wear anytime I'm in public, I'm wearing a mask because, first of all, it's smart. I don't really, and also because people know I'm on the assembly and I want to try and model the way we should. And so I think having open meetings when even the governor is saying he wants us a social distance, I think is problematic.
I assume we have social. Yeah,
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Mosier. Yeah, Kevin.
I was just going to say, I mean, isn't there a way we can work around this? Because I agree. I feel like this is one thing that's been bothering me. I know this is an emergency, but I feel like we haven't been giving enough notice for meetings. People they don't know when we're going to have meetings. They don't have enough time to think about what's on the meetings. The practicality of speaking out through this method is not practical. So we're really not hearing from the community. So is there any way we can like make an exception and we can have the meeting in person at the Centennial, and then, you know, social distancing where the public is maybe in another room and they're separated, but they're at least able to come in and speak. I just think there's got to be some way we can make it work so people can come to meetings.
Okay. Other comments from this? Yeah, Mr. Leach.
I haven't answered that question, but I'm trying to look it up at the same time. It is a mandate. I think it would probably fall under the religious services where they allow 20 people. It is in attachment D, but we'd have to do some more research on that one. But there is some limits in these mandates that we could potentially live under, just an option.
Okay, is there like a motion we would need to make, or are you just guys looking into that to see if it's possible? Because I really would like to see meetings back at the Centennial again. I think it's really important for the public to have a chance to participate, to hear in person. I think we're missing out a lot on what people have to say and think right now.
I'd like to get back to tonight's agenda. Dr. Wayne, you had a question, you have a comment?
I just have, I'm sorry, I have one statement, meaning some factual stuff, and then my comment, meaning where I would stand on rescission or rescinding or not, and a point related to enforcement, which is written into mandate 16. As a state of interest is that there is little evidence to suggest that face masks worn by members of the public prevent people from being infected by breathing in the virus, says William Schaffner, a professor in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. There's really no good, solid, reliable data. The only important thing that a mask does is it prevents the wearer from touching their face. Which is interesting. And I could get you 50 or 100 citations of mask value, but I chose this one specifically because it's from NPR. My statement is that this is kind of, like I said, damned if you do and damned if you don't. I think we should open up according to mandate 16. But I also feel that I don't want to rescind 2014 because I don't think we have a legal standing. So, but what to me it did at the very beginning is it made people pay attention to the fact that we are in a pandemic and that people who are going to be dealing with people just need to be at heightened alert. Again, people are going to do what they want. When the fish start coming, it's just going to be what it is. I've read through all the plans that were given to me. And if you read them carefully, it's when possible. We'll do this if possible. And it just goes on and on like that. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate all the processors coming to the table and doing the best they can. And that's all I want to see is the best they can. And so because I think the cat's out of the bag, I want both. I want my cake and eat it too. And that means I agree with mandate 16, but I also agree with the intent of the ordinance 14. And so it becomes a real problem. So it's a real conundrum here. So one final thing is that if you look at the mandate 16 under enforcement, it says, and I love the words of this, that part of the enforcement is a person that commits a crime of reckless endangerment if the person recklessly engages in conduct which creates a substantial risk of serious physical injury to another person. And so I think that's an important concept, and I think I may have the possibility of bringing that up at future meetings. The concept is important.
Just my comment about the fish processors is, if we rescind this thing, they are still under the state mandate to do that. And more important than the state mandate, in my view, Dr. Wayne, is people like you and me and the rest of the assembly members in our system, holding them to account and making them, in fact, hunker down out there and not let any of the out-of-state folks that come in stay on campus, and they go through the rigors that they say they're going to do every day. And I think there will be testing opportunities as well. Dr. Brule and I have talked about that. Anyway, what's the role of the assembly tonight in terms of the mandate? Do we want to have a motion, or do we want to just go home or stay home? Yeah, Valerie.
I would like to make a motion to rescind the motion of the April 14th Assembly meeting approving emergency ordinance 2020-14, requiring all people arriving in Sitka without exception, unless determined a critical healthcare worker, to self-quarantine for 14 days before working for critical workforce infrastructure businesses, and requiring such businesses to submit a protection plan to the city and borough of Sitka that must be approved by the municipal administrator.
I'll second that for purposes of discussion.
Okay. Sarah, any public comment?
No.
Pardon me?
Actually, yes, Rachel Roy asked to be called if there was a motion.
Okay. Well, my fellow assembly members, if this was easy, anybody could do it. So, yeah. I mean, you're right, Dr. Wayne, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's just,
It's true.
you just have to try to, as best we can, each of us individually, try to figure out what's going to be the best for the people we serve here in town. So I know each of us will do the best we can. So.
And while she's calling Rachel Roy, I'm getting texts from people, and I had one person question me about why can't
Rachel Roy, I'm currently on.
So that if, like, this person is a fisherman, he lives in state, part-time here, part-time up north. He wants to come home to Sitka. He doesn't want to quarantine for 14 days because he already had to quarantine when he went up there. And so if we rescind this, the state says intrastate traveler do not have to quarantine.
Yeah, Valerie, the state also put out a template for all fishing vessels that they have to go through in the report. Yeah.
That actually was approved and that mandate was released right before we came in here. That
Yeah.
mandate.
Oh. So, yeah, Tor?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that the state doesn't think we can enforce this, but I think Dr. Brule has Dr. Ween has a point that this keeps the pressure on. That we, if somebody wanted to have amends or to make amendments to make it a little more workable, I mean, I understand it came together quickly, but even though we really can't enforce this very well, it does keep the pressure on. And like I said, if there's anything that's going to get people killed, it's travelers. I mean, like I said, I don't have so much of an issue with the limited opening up that's in the, I guess not the latest health mandate anymore, the one before it, 16. But I have real issues with not being very careful about how we have people coming to town, just because we are the largest community in Alaska now that doesn't have verified cases of COVID-19, and I'd like to keep it that way. So I fully understand that we probably can't completely enforce this, but that I, number one, don't want to have my name on it saying we're not going to do it, and number two, it keeps the pressure on to keep people relevant or aware of it.
The pressure is, Tor, the pressure's on in terms of the state mandate is there. The fish processors have to deal with the EOC. They've got their plans, so we can do that. But listen, did you get Rachel on the line, Sarah?
No, it went to voicemail. I can try again if you like.
Or if you're ready to vote, we can vote.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to say one thing. Sorry for extending it out. Yeah, you're right. This is very hard, and it's honestly very confusing trying to figure all this out. I personally would like to align ourselves with what the state is doing. I'm okay with allowing the hunker down to expire naturally. And as far as rescinding, I've been listening to this discussion, rescinding the emergency ordinance. If we rescind this emergency ordinance, it's my understanding that the mandate 10 is extended until next month anyways, according to the state, which is the monitoring of the interstate travel. That's correct, right, Brian?
Yes.
So we're still protected if we rescind. I guess my thought is, as I'm thinking about it, as people are talking, is that the best thing to do is to align with the state, because yeah, it's my guess that one day we're gonna get sued no matter what. If we do one thing, we'll get sued. If we do another, we'll get sued. But there's more protection if we align with what the state is doing legally. Now, as far as the preservation of life, I believe that it's my understanding that if we rescind this, we're still protected because the state extended mandate 10 until next month. So I think it's okay to vote to rescind that. That's my opinion.
Well, in my view, we'll extend it beyond that if it needs to be, Kevin. I mean, nobody wants out-of-state workers to come in here on our fish plants in large numbers. And Dr. Ween is exactly right about it, unless they're going to go into quarantine. And again,
Absolutely.
yeah, and we politically as well as any other way will hold our fish processors to account. Okay, what's the status here? Yeah, Valerie.
Okay, if nobody's calling in for public testimony, I would like to state the reason why I proposed this is because we keep telling our small business people that, you know, we're all in this together and we care. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I've received numerous calls from small business people saying, you know, we know how to be responsible. We know how to take care of ourselves. We're figuring out a way to slow open. Some of them won't be able to, like Mary said, but it should be their choice. It's common sense that's involved, and you can't dictate or mandate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. Kevin, yes.
One of the things that I understood why one of the pressures for us to put forward 2020-14 is was to actually get some of the processors and others to, you know, bring their plans forward to the city, because we weren't getting those shared with us by the state. And that's really where our own resolution goes a little bit farther than the state, in that we're asking for those to come to us as well, so that we understand the plans, that we can verify and okay the plans as, you know, as a municipality, because you know, really we like to talk about this a lot, but you know, Sitka is different than Juneau, is different than Ketchikan, is different than anywhere else that is going to, you know, have one of these plans put forward towards the state. So we're getting to look at what unique pieces are here. And I agree with Dr. Ween as well. I think this keeps the pressure on. I think it, you know, it reinforces the fact that, you know, this is where the direction that we want to go, and these are the protections that we want to have inherent for our community. You know, my vote is going to be no to not rescind 2020-14.
Do we not have the
I'd like to
plans
see those stay in place.
Do we not have the plan for the processors, John?
Can you repeat your question, Mayor?
Do we not have the plans from the processors?
I do have the plans from the processors, and they were sent from the processors, and they were also sent from the state. Now, they said that in one of my meetings last week that any affected communities with processors, they'll be sharing the plans. And this new health mandate, number 17, we get the individual plans from the individual fishing vessels as well.
Are we ready to vote? Yes, Dr. Wayne. Yes, Dr. Wayne.
I just wanted to say that, again, we essentially have no standing. The purpose of 2020-14 was really to have a seat at the table. This is our community, and it's important that we all share what is going on. And I think the ordinance did accomplish that. And again, I feel that if we remove it, then we definitely have no standing on asking people to share. And I think it was important because in order for the assembly to govern and for Mr. Leach to administer, we need to know what's going on in our city. And I don't think it is unfair to say, we want a seat at the table with your plans. We understand what the state is doing, but we're all in this. Again, it's a cliche, but we're all in it together. And I honestly believe that we also linked the ordinance with the state's quarantine, and that it expired when the state eliminated their quarantine, and that was the motion that was made at the last meeting. So I think at the end of the day, everything is aligned. I think we can move forward and start to open the city. and accept all of these things that are happening, some of which we cannot change. And we're not going to change this influx. And so I say we move forward, but not release the ability to have a seat at the table to our own fate.
I
Thank
think
you.
we haven't.
That's the least
Okay.
we have.
Well, I think we have a seat at the table, Dr. Wayne, but listen, these are individual, we all have to vote. Okay, Sarah, call for the vote. Stevie, do you want to comment? Yes,
I'm just muting so we can vote.
yeah.
The motion before you is to rescind emergency ordinance 2020-14. I would like to remind the assembly that it takes 5 affirmative votes to adopt the motion to rescind, and that's for city general. Mayor Pat,
Yes.
Who was that?
Who?
Valerie,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
No.
Mr. Knox,
No.
Mr. Moser,
Yes.
Mr. Eisenberg,
No.
and Dr. Wayne.
No, and pigs do fly because
Yeah, no, they don't.
Tor, Mr. Knox and myself voted on the same side.
So it's actually not appropriate to be commenting during the voting period. The vote is 3-4.
Sorry, I apologize, but couldn't resist.
Noted. Persons to be heard. Mr. Leach.
Mayor, I just want to remind everyone and put this out for public, not under persons to be heard, that with our hunker down resolution remaining in place, I will need to leave City Hall closed until that expires.
We have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.